Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Voice of Authority webinar. My name is Toby Fox, and I'm the Managing Director at 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils. Our job is to keep our network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. And one way we're doing that is through this channel, a platform for councils to discuss their ambitions, their challenges, their influences and issues of urgency. In 2 weeks, just as the Mayor of London has announced that City Hall is relocating from Southwark to Newham, we're asking what's the future for the Great British Town Hall? And we hope you can join us for that at 11 AM on the 19th of November with Rogers, Stirk Harbour and Partners and their guests. Next week, we're going to be helping to launch an important paper called Build Homes, Build Jobs, Build Innovation, which landed with government a month ago, and we believe landed well. The paper is the work of Mark Farmer and Mike Diath and a host of contributors, and we'll be handing the stage over to a number of them next week to describe how factory-built homes could account for a quarter of Britain's annual housing supply and set out a fast-track investment programme to build 75,000 modular homes a year by 2030, creating up to 50,000 jobs and reducing carbon emissions from new homes by 40%. That's next Thursday at 11 AM, and you can sign up now for all of these webinars at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. Back to today. Well, in a sense, back to April. We've been running this channel for a few months now, so we thought it would be useful to revisit a few of the most popular sessions. And among the best attended were 3 webinars with similar themes around the roles that councils might play in reviving town centres and the practical steps that might best support high street recovery. So today we thought we could revisit some of the initiatives and campaigns revealed during those sessions to ask what's been successful and what ambitions councils have for their high streets now, and what are the implications of the coronavirus second wave and the return to lockdown. And we're going to do that in some excellent company. It's a pleasure to welcome back in alphabetical order John Hoyle, the founder and CEO at Sook, and Nabeel Khan, the Director for Economy, Culture and Skills at London Borough of Lambeth, Jamie Ounan, Director at Inner Circle Consulting, and Carol Sam, Business Growth and Inward Investment Manager at Ealing Borough Council. Our regular viewers among you will know the score by now. We're going to hand over the stage to these fonts of insight and experience, and they're going to enthuse and inspire and perhaps provoke you into bombarding us with questions. And my job is going to be to make sure we've got 10 to 15 minutes at the end to put the most popular questions to our panel. And I've let you down in that regard a couple of times recently, viewers. My hands are held up, so I'm doubly determined that you'll get your chance today. So let's get you primed by turning first of all to Carol Sam from Ealing. Carol, what are the 3 most successful initiatives that you've implemented or observed to support your high streets and town centres?
Okay, so before I launch into the specifics, just to set a bit of context. So following the first wave of lockdown, I was heavily involved with the immediate response. So Ealing had set up a number of tactical cells, and I was heading up the business support cell, working with colleagues internally, local bids and traders groups, and some of the regional organisations such as West London Business. So involved with undertaking business surveys, coordinating communications, and making sure that businesses were informed in terms of what support was available. There was lots of information constantly coming on, changing, and also working with colleagues in the finance team to set the criteria for the discretionary grants and making sure that more and more businesses were able to apply. So then we moved to the second phase, and we started to put in place structures to navigate through the recovery. So I think in terms of the 3 initiatives I'd like to focus on is the establishment of the High Street Task Force, and some of that work we were hoping to drive through in terms of recovery, looking at our comms approach and our comms strategy, and working with our local business to maximise the opportunity of trading by using outside space. So if I go to the first in terms of setting up the task force, like most boroughs, we received the High Street Recovery Fund, and as part of that fund, we had to set up a task force. And within that task force, it was quite a wide representation of stakeholders. And for the first time, I think that what was really important, that we had a partnership that hadn't really existed before, and a real representative partnership from, I mentioned the business improvement districts, but we also had a lot of trade organisations and internal colleagues that hadn't necessarily worked before. We're often criticised as local authorities of working in silos. but we came together with a common cause, and we really and also wanted to make the High Street Task Force quite representative of the local business community. And so through that group, we co-designed an action plan, and a lot of thought and design went into the action plan, which focused around themes and initiatives that not just looked at the short-term response, but actually the medium and the long term that would take us through to resilience, but also sustainability, bearing in mind what we just come through. So through that work, through the action plan, we had we've identified 13 key actions around certain themes, looked at joint promotion, how could we capture data, what kind of toolkits could we use, how could we enhance active travel. So some real meaty stuff that we can get our tooth in, and started working towards that. I suppose the second initiative, probably less of an initiative, but it was really important, is how we then collated all that information that was coming through and get a real good, strong communication strategy working again with our comms who really led on it. And again, through that recovery period, we had, there was lots of information to give out to our local businesses and high streets about making sure that businesses kept their premises safe, both for their staff, but also given the confidence that people can go back to the high street, that it was safe to do so. And using a number of channels, you know, we had the posters. I think most boroughs were familiar with the two meter distancing. But what was really particularly, I think, quite interesting for Ealing, we're quite a diverse borough, and there's an area in Southall, and we've been on the news regularly for not adhering to some of the social distancing, and our numbers were rising. But in particular in Southall, I think we had to go deeper. Myself, I had to go into the shops. A lot of the businesses within Southall in Ealing are, the high street shops are Asian owned. English isn't necessarily the first language. So there was extra communication we had to put into making sure that message came across. And I think it worked really well. We used the local Desi radio, which was appealed to a lot of Punjabi and Hindi speakers. And the portfolio holder for business, councillor Jasbir Ounan, is also a Hindi and Punjabi speaker. So she went on the radio. So I think it's probably less of an initiative, but it's looking at how we focused our efforts in making sure that that comms message really went out and it appealed, and it was able, the businesses were able to take it on board. And also, I think, it's going back to the task force, as a result of that representative nature of the task group in each of the area, we identified individuals who could report back to say, look, we've got a problem in this particular high street, this town centre, we don't think it's working, we really need to get that comms message again. So that collaboration and that approach worked really well. The third initiative I probably want to highlight, it's a bit of a case study and of an observation. So at the time, a lot of businesses were pivoting online because obviously they were closed and they had to look at more innovative ways of trading. And one of our local businesses, it's a pub called the Dodo Pub in Hanwell. I'm giving a plug. The owner, Lucy Doe, very, very clever. It's a very small pub. You know, obviously she's locked down. She started delivering beer delivery, but also doing online tutorials. Pairing beer and cheese, doesn't necessarily, but it had a wide appeal and really popular. And what was, again, so looking at how she was able to maintain that during lockdown. And when during the recovery in the summer, she also, another innovation, we had the Pitts Hanger Manor, which was our lovely Soames Gallery, had reopened, but unfortunately their kitchen was closed. And again, the collaboration of the Dodo Pub with this lovely institution that had the kitchen closed and utilising the outside space, and that coincided with Eat Out to help out again. So it's the collaboration that happened during that period of enabling outside space, businesses going online. So lots of innovation, I thought, that in terms of my observation, that took place with our local businesses, which helped to maintain their survival.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Carol. So we've got a task force with 13 actions. We've got a multilingual, multi-channel comms strategy with members up front, and we've got working with local business and a Dodo that's not going extinct, which is heartening to hear. Nabeel, from Ealing to Lambeth, what are the initiatives that you'd single out over the last sort of 6 to 8 months that have been supporting high streets and town centres in Lambeth?
Thanks, Toby. I could say so much, but I'll keep it to three. I mean, first, I think it's worth mentioning that we published Lambeth's economic resilience strategy, which was our overarching economic recovery framework, and it sets out our short-term, medium-term, and long-term objectives for adaptation of our high streets and recovery. And crucially, I think, looks at recovery through the sort of triple lens of people, business, and place, because we can't sort of disaggregate between those three things, we feel. And we were quite clear it was always going to be an agile strategy, and it will need to be tweaked and adapted as the sort of pandemic unfolded. But what it did do, and I think still does, is it gives our external stakeholders a clear sense of direction of travel in this period of uncertainty and amidst all this uncertainty. It was developed in conjunction with our bids, with our businesses, our developers, our investors, and our educational institutions. So it gave them a real sense of ownership over our collective goals, and it was really important in sort of setting that out at the beginning. So all the tactical interventions we made, some of which were actually very similar to what Carol has just outlined. There was something to hang them off. I think the second thing I would highlight is we appointed a dedicated new head of high streets, who's been given a remit to embed cross-directorate working relationships across the council, and she's been absolutely brilliant and mobilized resources from public health through to public protection, transport, highways, all of the traditional, I suppose, areas of concern that businesses have had with councils in the past, whereby we're just not speaking to one another. There's a siloed approach, again echoing what Carol has just said. She's been brilliant at just bringing all of those teams together, and it's meant things like, for example, we were able to mobilize our pavement licensing application system much quicker, because she's got that sort of focus and remit, and our public realm interventions, where we made those, whether they were sort of transport, whether they were parking bays being temporarily converted, whether they were low traffic neighborhoods, it was much more of a streamlined sort of internal process, which gave a lot of confidence to our external stakeholders. And the third thing I'd highlight is we've actually set up a high street dashboard, and I can't sort of emphasize this one enough. Actually, during the start of the first lockdown, we relied a lot on fast indicators, and we learned a lot actually as a result. But what the key thing that we learned really was that we've got a whole host of data within the council, whether it's planning applications, pavement licensing, business rates. So we sort of brought that in one place. We've commissioned some external data to understand footfall and understand sort of movement patterns around the borough. And then we brought in some GLA and TfL data around CCTV camera, around mobile phone usage and all of that, which gives us a really comprehensive picture and real-time understanding of what's going on our high streets. So I can now see where the sort of vacancies are occurring, what sort of churn is happening, how many fines we're issuing on our low traffic neighborhoods. And it sounds really boring, but actually it helps us make much more informed decisions around our sort of temporary and our more medium-term high street recovery ambitions. And I'll stop there.
Fantastic, Nabeel. And we ran a whole session on sort of agile data and the role it can play in these initiatives. So it's good to hear that is making a real difference. And I think that's probably something we should revisit again, because the sheer weight of the volume of data that is available to you, the job is a little bit understanding which parts are useful and how to make use of them. Great stuff. Okay, now we've heard from a couple of local authorities on the initiatives that they're introducing. John, you are one of the initiatives in a sense. From an operator's perspective, can you give us an idea of three of the things that you've done, the interventions that you've had on high streets and town centres that have supported recovery?
Absolutely, and it probably is worth me starting off by saying I've got a much easier job than Carol and Nabeel, because I only have to think about one problem as opposed to many, and Sook is resolutely focused on driving accessibility to empty shops, and I'm going to demo to you what that looks like. We are trying to solve the problem that is the landlord and tenant relationship by creating a system that allows anyone to occupy spaces and rent them by an hour. This is what our sites look like. It should show you in a second. They are essentially a modular fitted out space which anyone using our website can drop digital content into, change lighting, book furniture and book staff, which means that now anyone, anywhere can use UK physical space to showcase a product or a service or do anything else, which doesn't necessarily need to be retail. And it's incredibly versatile, not just for big brands on high value hours, but also for all sorts of different uses throughout the rest of the week. And we're driving utility across 120 hours of the week, which provides sustainable revenue for landlords and, importantly, appropriately priced accessibility for everyone else. And we're anchored by some of the big brands there, which is exciting for us. This is what it can look like. This is actually has not been done yet, but we were planning on launching the John Lewis Christmas advert. And here's an example of it being used by a high lifetime value customer, such as an Amazon Prime customer, showcasing the services of a digitally native brand, paying a premium on a Saturday that underwrites the viability of the space for everyone else the rest of the week. You can see how quickly we can create a bespoke environment to showcase anything and do things that don't necessarily require high value retail hours, such as gaming. Amazon's Twitch service, for instance, is very popular in hours that have very limited value to retailers. Streaming services, selling devices like Alexa, but also using, let's say, the Monday, Tuesday evening slots to showcase things like TED Talks. And interestingly, we found in our sites that on Mondays and Tuesdays, we drive more interest and revenue before 10 a.m. and after 6 p.m. Than we do in the rest of the days combined, which just shows that thinking about the utility of spaces is a really interesting way of considering how to maximize the utility of your high streets. So in terms of the three things we've done, we've tried to make it as easy as possible for anyone to access space. And I'm just going to show you how that works. On our website, you can go into any of our spaces and you can fit them out using Google Slides or any other, or Canva or any other bit of software. So this is an example of that. You could go easily today onto the website. You could drop whatever logo you want into that space. I'm using today's for an obvious example. You then can preview that in 3D in the spaces. And you can also, whilst that's loading, fiddle around with different furniture configurations, different light settings, and give yourself a completely full understanding of what your physical space will look like when you rent it by the hour, which opens up UK physical space to people in all sorts of different areas. That's combined with a pricing system that is incredibly flexible and a bit like booking a seat on a Ryanair aircraft, allows utility. And then we have a full analytics package that gives even our most simple occupiers a way to understand how their physical space is performing and to learn insights about how to use physical space better. I'll stop there because that's my 3 minutes.
Fantastic. It's such a brilliant initiative. And viewers, we've got a couple of very short videos at the end of this webinar that you can watch. One that goes into a little bit of detail on what Sook can do for high street, and then one that's a case study of one in operation. So if you want to hang around at the end of this session, you can learn a little bit more about this this excellent intervention. Okay, let's move on to Jamie at Inner Circle. How does everything that you've heard so far resonate with the many local authorities that you're working with across the country, Jamie? And what initiatives have most impressed you during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think fabulous creativity, isn't it? So I mean, just to give you a bit of background, Inner Circle works with city leaders all over the country. We're quite a creative bunch. We're pretty focused on delivery and getting things done. So we're a big fan of activist councils and who take a real proactive role in developing their areas. So all the stuff for here is absolutely fabulous. We've got 3 categories that I've been observing of what's been going on with these examples fit with. First of all, you've got this this diversification and digitization here that's going on. Yeah, and I think that is so. Sook, we saw WeWork in the workspace. And I think some of the smaller, more creative businesses are going even further than WeWork are at the moment, and they are looking at about taking over parts of hotels or small disused spaces. You and I have spoken about how to run webinars and seminars in spaces that feel a bit more like Britain's Got Talent, where you can really run in creative workshops, because I think it's pretty hard to run creative workshops on Zoom or Teams, but if you had the right environment. So people are beginning to invest in that kind of thing. we're seeing we've seen John and Sook with really getting into that whole leveraging the time slots, leveraging the you can come in with a small community cooking club, or you can launch Nike in the middle of Trowbridge or somewhere like that, so that's fantastic. You've also seen this I've seen some fantastic pivots. I mean, the amount of small businesses where I live in East London that have switched to online services and how quickly they've done that. We're very lucky. We've got a real wealth of small creative digital businesses in the area that are helping these people, and they're also quite digitally literate. But actually, I think there's a big thing about how left behind those businesses that aren't digitally literate, how they've been left behind, and what do we do about that? So I think there's a pattern there where those two things have split. I think you've seen sort of diversification in culture in the public realm and so on and so forth. So I think, and also I think we were seeing before lockdown things like use of ex-office spaces for urban farms and these sorts of things. I think all of that is now big time back on the table, and then some. I think we're seeing a new stewardship model. So I think in the Sook world, you've got those guys taking over different places, but you also got asset managers, major asset managers, Grosvenor's, whatever of this world, who are looking to taking a different profit model, where they're sharing in rent. They're on an open book basis because they realise people can't pay the hefty prices. So you're seeing a lot more flexibility in that from the private sector and the public sector. You're seeing a lot of you're seeing some interesting pivots in the stewardship space. So Cornwall. There's so many small towns in Cornwall, the council couldn't possibly go and enforce lockdown rules and all over the place. So they allowed every town in Cornwall to kind of interpret the rules appropriately, safely, but said, look, you do what you need to do for your area. You work out how this little fishing village or this hilltop town, you work out how you work, you use that space and gradually see, creative use of the public realm. You've seen councils, teams working in a completely different, much more integrated way, where perhaps councils might have been characterised maybe unfairly about working too much in silos. Well, now you just flip that on the head. They've had teams focused around problems. So Nabeel would have been mobilising teams around problems, teams around high streets. So all of that is a fantastic new mode of working, so I think that's fabulous. So there's two points: is diversification, digitization. You've got this new model of stewardship coming out, and then I think over time people have just gradually started looking at going back to the big picture, coming out of the like panic stations, which is an understandable human response, and going, well, hold on a minute, this 20-minute city move, that's kind of just good urban design that we've been thinking about for a very long time, actually. So how can we double down on the things that we kind of knew were right anyway? So how can we get that, bend that investment in there? Then you've got the home working. Well, again, that pattern was kind of going that way anyway. So again, how can we adapt? This gives opportunities. Places like some Albans, I've never seen more footfall in some respects when you're allowed to have it, during different times of the week. So again, that gives a huge opportunity. So people are looking at stepping back, looking at the big opportunities. It doesn't take much in recessions and during and after recessions for price adjustments to happen quite quickly. Yeah. So again, I think the wise thinkers, the steady investors will be looking at when the price adjustments gets appropriate to bring in these new creative models. So again, I think if you're a manager of a CBD, your instant reaction is panic. I think if you've got a tax increment finance scheme that's loaded against business rates, I think your instant is to think crikey. But actually, I think they're already starting to have conversations with big and small and medium-sized investors about pivoting. So again, that's it. And then I suppose in the big picture, it just reminds me that we know that the trickle down of private sector action does not support those that need it the most, the people on the bottom of the income run, the most vulnerable. Those are the people that have had the most shock. So again, I think we're seeing an opportunity, a realization that the public sector does have a role, that local governance and local economics is an important thing to understand. And instead of divesting from that, I think we will gradually see an investment in that, which will be better for every player, the public sector, the private sector, every community that lives there. So that's the third thing. Stepping back, looking at the big picture. Yeah.
Great stuff. Thanks a lot, Jamie. Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? We always think whenever we're in the middle of a crisis, it always feels like the rest of the world is in stasis, and our world is just running away hell for leather. But of course, everyone's moving, everyone's trying to be agile, everyone's trying to pivot. So there is lots of other activity going on that you can plug into, and sure enough, as time goes by, other markets start to respond and react in ways that can be helpful. Let's go back to Ealing. Carol, we're in lockdown again. It's the second wave of coronavirus. How are your 13 task force actions and your comms strategy and your engagement with businesses being affected by the second wave of coronavirus?
I think I suppose the initial response would be, oh my God, it's going to have a huge impact and it's going to slow it down. I think what it's made us do is take a step back and look at those 13 points plan that we had in the action plan and reprioritize. So definitely need to reprioritize in terms of what's some of the immediate actions we need to deal with. But it's funny. So in preparation to this, and also as part of my job in finding out how our high streets and town centres are going to be faring and how prepared they are, I spoke to the one of our high street, Pitt's Hanger Lane, which I should give it a plug. It won High Street of the Year in 2015. And I spoke to John Martin, and he's the kind of head of the traders group on that high street. And it's really, he said to me, businesses are really optimistic. I mean, obviously they're not optimistic and they're not looking forward to this lockdown, but they've learned the lessons from the first lockdown. And a lot of those businesses, and I mentioned briefly about pivoting online. A lot of the businesses actually have gone online. So some of the boutique traders, they've already going online. So they're prepared. They kind of knew it was coming again. So in terms of, the lockdown on that particular high street, and also picking up on Jamie's point and the changes in working pattern, a lot of people are working from home within Ealing. So they are supporting their high streets. So in terms of, and again, speaking to John and some colleagues who live, a friend of mine, I spoke to her last night and I said, how are you geared up for this? She goes, oh, my boys are loving it. And I didn't quite get it. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, they're looking forward to all the takeaways. She said, because what we're going to do is, order a takeaway service from each of the restaurants. So going back to the kind of the action plan. So again, we've got the task force set up. So we're able to then, so on two levels, we're able to reach out to some of the traders groups and the businesses to get easy access to information about how things are going to fare. And positively, for some high streets, we have to bear in mind, some are going to be impacted. They've been able to pivot online. And just another example, Ealing Broadway, one of our big shopping centres, I spoke to the landlord there, which is British Land, just to get a sense. It's slightly different dynamics because Pitt's Hanger Lane, it's lots of independents. Obviously, needed in Broadway, we've got a lot of the big kind of multiples. And I won't name the name, but one of the stores, up until yesterday, this is a restaurant, wasn't sure whether or not it was going to actually, close or stay open in order to deliver takeaway. So interestingly, it shows the flexibility of some of the small independents in terms of the high streets. And you'd think that a big multiple would have it wrapped up. But anyway, so to be specific to answer your questions, we've got the infrastructure. Some of the 13 points in the action plan that we identified, some will have to be reprioritized. But in terms of the immediate impact on some of the businesses, particularly the independents, they've actually been able to pivot. From a comms point of view, again, we've got the infrastructure. We've learned the lessons from the first lockdown. And again, we've got a lot of teams working together. So we were able to get the message out again, in terms of we started putting a message, particularly given the information, there is some uncertainty about what businesses can't do. Even I think the legislation was it Tuesday, it came out, and I was listening to the radio driving home from Ealing yesterday and hearing people saying, oh, can I stay open? Can I? But again, so we've got the infrastructure, we've got the colleagues in place to go and help and advise some of those businesses because it's working together quite closely. So in terms of how is the lockdown? Obviously, it's not going to be great for some of our high street, but I think the infrastructure that we've put in place, we've learned the lessons of the past and really working together, we'll get through this.
Thanks a lot, Carol. Nabeel, your resilience strategy, your head of high streets, your high street dashboard, it's more of the same in terms of those initiatives, isn't it? They just become ever more useful, and their importance is highlighted again. What's the sort of wider knock-on effects of the second wave for you? And are you able to sustain activity and support the high streets to the same level that you were the first time round?
It's a really good question, Toby, actually. I mean, I think for me, a second wave increases the importance, but does not change the direction of travel with any of the initiatives that we mentioned before. Data is still king, collaboration is still going to be required, and having a neighbourhood focus is still the best way to cut through and carry our communities with us in terms of some of the temporary changes that we may want to introduce. I think it's worth mentioning, though, all of our modelling locally and, of course, nationally that we're taking into account seems to suggest that the economic consequences of a second lockdown are going to be less painful than the first one, and it's for a number of reasons. You know, the sort of public transport usage has never sort of really returned to April or pre-April levels. Obviously, this time schools are not being shut down, which still drives some economic activity and allows a lot of people to continue going to work and use the high street, etc. And of course, some sectors are still being left open in the way that they weren't first time round. And the other thing, I suppose, the crucial thing is that there is an end date in sight. The difference between the first time and this time was, this time we've got the 2nd of December. It's a very sort of clear deadline. So I think the hope is amongst some retailers and businesses that I'm speaking to that actually the sort of activity will pick up in late December, January. And actually, if you speak to some economists at the moment, they're predicting a 3.3 drop in Q4 compared to a 20% drop that we faced in Q2. So I think there is a lot of optimism around at sort of macro level and certainly from the modelling that we've done. But it comes back to the data. You see, I'm able to sort of base this on looking at our sort of retail diversity, looking at the diversity mix of our local town centres. The more diverse they are, the more resilient they are, which helps cushion the sort of the impact of this. So I think that's a key thing to sort of mention here, really. The other thing I suppose I would say is what it does do, a second lockdown, is it further underlines our focus on resilience rather than recovery. I think the messaging we were keen to capture within our recovery framework, as I mentioned before, was this idea of resilience. So as much as I'm focusing on what the future of the high street will look like in terms of what may be a hub and club model that comes for the office market, what are some of the growth sectors, low carbon, creative, tech, life sciences that we may want to incubate within the borough. We can't forget about our everyday economy. We can't forget about the services and functions that are predominantly based on high streets that are serving our sort of population. So it's a tricky balance to strike, but actually all the stuff that we're doing and we were doing in the first lockdown, we do them more. The big difference, I suppose, is some of the government grants that we had first time round, they're not going to be as generous the second time round, which means we're not going to be able to support the same volume, I suppose, of businesses that we did in the first lockdown. And what we did in the first lockdown is we actually used some of our developer contributions to help with setting up a local economy hardship fund, and particularly focus on our arts and creative organisations and provide them with some temporary relief to plug the gap that wasn't there from government relief. And of course, we've sort of maxed out our coffers, so to speak. So that's going to be slightly different. But I'm still optimistic. I'm looking at the sort of economic forecast. I'm looking at the modelling, and I don't think this is going to be as harmful as the first lockdown was.
Yeah. Okay. Fingers crossed. And I guess we're all hoping that end in sight. There's some certainty around that end in sight, but obviously it's a bit of a movable feast, that, because nobody can predict what my the youngsters in my household have started calling Rona or even COVID-19. And the future evolution of this awful pandemic. I've got two headlines from Property Week, two days apart. Yesterday, I've got a headline that said it read, "Footfall figures show that shopper numbers continuing to improve for the 5th successive month in October." And then a day later, today, tension grows as experts warn lockdown will cause total carnage across retail and hospitality. So that's that's a mood swing across a single day. John, what's your mood like today?
It's mixed because, of course, we can't serve any of our occupiers, and when we're shut. But at the same time, the opportunity for us to have a big impact and help the grassroots recovery of towns and cities around the UK and beyond after this pandemic is increased. So, what's interesting about this sort of second wave and lockdown is sort of the attitudinal shift that it will continue to affect around landlords, around retailers, and around customers. And I think those are all important elements that are worth understanding. From a landlord perspective, it's just in case it hadn't dawned on them already, it's the realization that the old model of engaging with retailers is not fit for purpose universally across the board anymore. So there is, and I'm from that world of asset management and surveyors, where putting risk onto occupiers is essentially the modus operandi. I think the second lockdown is making all of those asset managers much more receptive to experimental and more risky approaches, which I think is really important, and in my view, a good rebalancing of power in the marketplace. So that I think is a good thing. From a retailer perspective, again, it's another opportunity to sort of navel gaze and consider alternative strategies to having shops for a decade and doing the same old thing. The reason we have vanilla high streets is because only the strongest can survive in a high fixed cost environment that we've created artificially through essentially a kind of capitalist structure. And that's not to say we need to completely shake that up, but it's an opportunity for people to think differently about how they use physical space, potentially be more flexible. It's an opportunity for other players to come into the market. I mean, 3,500 businesses were getting registered at Companies House every day during the last lockdown. All of those guys need a home. It could definitely be in our high streets. And then I think the final piece is around consumers and the way they engage with high streets. Obviously, we are all going to be very focused on online for the next month or so. And it's great for adoption of online services. It doesn't mean that the high street's obsolete, but it just means that people who are operating in physical spaces need to think differently about what people want. Amenity is no longer going to be served as well by physical space, but delight, experience, non-retail uses will be. And so again, there's a really interesting opportunity to think about what consumers want. And particularly the Gen Z guys, as we're finding with our Depop occupiers, are very focused on things like sustainability, on sharing. It's a totally different model to the way that traditional fashion has worked for decades. And that this lockdown now gives us all an opportunity to think about those changes and embrace them in physical space when we're back up and running in the not too distant future.
Great stuff. Thanks, John. So what we're getting a sense of here across all of your responses is that there's been a recalibration, that businesses and councils are both working in new ways, and that having come through the sort of first phase of coronavirus, there's this recalibration and understanding and a focus on resilience. Jamie, is that a fair reflection sort of nationally in your view? And is that enough to get us through the second lockdown, the second phase of coronavirus, do you think?
Yeah, I think it is a fair reflection. I think you are seeing local solutions. So the solution in Birmingham is very different from the solution in Cornwall. Obviously, you would hope it was. The solution in Hackney slightly different from Lambeth. I think the most important thing is the mindset that this has helped shift. Yeah, this is the thing to take advantage of. Those stewards of place, whether it be Grosvenor or Lambeth Council, the ones that are going to help the communities through this, or are the ones that have freed their mind up from the way things have always been done. The ones that have collaborated very quickly, the ones that have realized that if a pandemic can knock structures off, off course, then so can they quite easily just shift structures around. If there's a pricing model that felt like it was there and permanent forever, it's not. If there are things around the corner that they thought might never come around the corner, they do. Yeah. So I think the way everybody's going to have to get through the second wave is to embrace that, to embrace that with care, consideration, compassion, and I would urge everybody to. I think the market will adjust itself in some of these very creative solutions. I think it is for the public sector to do two things: to look very carefully at those that are being left behind and work out ways to get those bring those characters through this. That is vital. And I think if the public sector to look at this over the long term, this risk reward model that John talked about, and I think where the councils actually, although you wouldn't feel it this way, they do take a lot of risk and they don't get a lot of reward. Yeah. Whereas actually some of the private sector don't take a lot of risk and they do get a lot of reward because that's been their game. And I think that again, I would urge people to the stewards of the councils to think that way. And I think more people like John, let's clone more people like John and bring that creative solutions into this space, because I think the world will come out of this a slightly better place. Yeah, overall.
Viewers, you're going to get your chance to interrogate our panel any minute now. So get your questions in on the Q&A if you'd like to find out more about the initiatives that they've implemented, if you'd like to find out more about their responses to the second wave and the second lockdown. But first, I'd like to go around the panel one more time and ask if you had a chance to ask for a single thing to help you support and revitalise high streets and town centres, what would you ask for and who would you ask? Carol.
I had prepared 3 things in terms of short, medium and long-term goals, but as you've only, I'm conscious of time and you asked for one, I think actually it would be looking at our data. I think Nabeel had mentioned that would really help us, I think, going forward in terms of not just resilience, but recovery. And I think Lambeth started and Nabeel mentioned in terms of his use of data. But for us is building a borough-wide evidence base, getting better consolidating evidence, commissioning new data and data of analysis so we can understand better footfall, consumer spend, dwell time, nighttime activities, diversity of uses, vacant units. Those stuff, I think that will be really powerful in terms of really moving forward and starting to put some initiatives in place which would unlock of initiatives such as, what we do with all the empty premises and vacant units, etc. So data, I think, is probably critical, and it's one of our.
That's interesting, Carol. Nabeel, what sort of what would the priorities be? What would you advise the priorities to be in terms of data collection? What types of data and sources of data have been most useful to you?
So I would start off with what we already hold as a council. So business rates data is the first place to start, as that's where we started, and then layer on planning applications, pavement licensing, conversion data that we're also getting. So it is really starting off with what we've got as a council, and all councils have this, and it's a tremendous amount. And already that gives you a really good picture of the sort of economic sort of picture of our local places. And then what we did was we commissioned someone to give us footfall data in particular. So we installed footfall counters across our high streets, and that gives you the footfall information. And then what you can get from London level, actually, and this is a conversation that is taking place at London level, and it'll be good to have more people push this, is MasterCard have agreed a data sharing agreement with the GLA, whereby they can give you anonymized local spend data. O2 can give you anonymized local mobile phone data usage. And actually, when you start layering all of this data on top of one another, it really does give you a really good holistic. And it's what allows me to sort of come on here and say semi-confidently that the second lockdown is not going to have the same implication as the first lockdown was, because you can sort of track consumer spend and all the stuff that you just talked about there. Carol, and the other thing I would say on that, though, is it's all great having all this data, but really the real trick is how you convert that data into insights. And that is really, so at the moment, I'm honestly swimming in a lot of data. My team are swimming in a lot of data, and what they're working to is, right, what is the really useful bit that our public protection team need this weekend so they can go and enforce, so they can go and deploy their resources? What are the bits that our public health team need so they can model where the sort of clusters of outbreaks may be in different parts of Lambeth? And that's the really key thing to crack. So the data bit is quite easy actually. Once you've got all the partners in place, it's the insights function that's the sort of holy grail.
Fantastic. I feel another session coming on, Nabeel. But again, in the interest of sharing best practice amongst councils, thanks for that. Nabeel, coming back to you, what is the one thing that would be most helpful or supportive that you would ask for, and who would you ask?
Okay, I'm gonna go national. This is my nice to have. I think national legislation and a policy framework that helps us to capture the flexibility and the agility that we showed in the first wave would be really, really useful. So we've done this. So the streamlined pavement licensing application process that was pushed through the Business Planning Act, great. It allowed us to move quickly. All right, it wasn't so good in that it was capped at £100 and councils had to sort of fund the gap, but at least it allowed us then as local authorities to bash people's heads together and say, look, we need to get this in place because businesses will be asking for this license. I think more of that. And if I could have just related to that, as well as sort of more flexibility around local discretion of grants, etc. I think refreshing the VOA's register, so the Valuation Office Agencies register, because the funding formulas that all local authorities are being given to support with tier 2, tier 3 restriction grants are based on the VOA register, which I know, because we've done this, are about a year out of date, which means that in Lambeth, about 300 businesses weren't captured in terms of the funding formula we were given. So that's something that I think the government could really look at fairly quickly, refresh those registers. Local authorities have the most up-to-date registers now. We can feed them upwards, and it will really help us with getting the appropriate funding that businesses need during a second lockdown.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Nabeel. Viewers, if you agree, disagree, if you'd like to find out more, or let us know what you'd be asking for if you got a chance to ask for some support or help, get those over to us now. We're coming to you in a second, but first, John, from the private sector perspective, from the startup perspective, and the innovator and disruptor perspective, what single piece of help would be most useful, and who would you go to for it?
So I know what I want, but I don't know who to go to, but that's why I'm sitting in this forum today. So we need help and support from local authorities across the UK. And the big challenge for us is that engagement. I can't engage directly with the High Streets Task Force because I'm a private entity. It's difficult to deal with it, engage with what is quite a fragmented sort of market across the board. And we have a solution that is got huge demand from two elements that all local authorities want to help. We've appraised over 50 sites for landlords across the UK since the world came back to life in early September. And we've had over 80 occupiers of our 2 sites since early September until this lockdown, showing that there is, even in a really terrible market, massive appetite for people to take physical space. And so the third piece of that puzzle is local authorities who can support this, because the central government has allocated huge amounts of money to drive recovery and rejuvenation of high streets. I need to partner, as I do with landlords, with local authorities, so that we can put these fantastic space activation solutions into the places that most need them around the UK.
Fantastic. Let's throw that straight back to Carol and Nabeel. Carol, how do you respond?
I can't wait to chat further with John and see what we can do in Ealing. So yeah.
Great stuff. Nabeel?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I really welcome that, John. I think there is something for all local authorities to consider actually as part of this, which is our own asset management strategies. And that, a lot of local authorities are still fairly large landowners in their local areas. They certainly own a lot of buildings, and there is something about one of the things that we're considering pushing in our local high streets is more co-location of services, whether that be JCP, Job Centre Plus, ourselves, other agencies, charities, third sector, etc. And just having sort of changing that dynamic from being retail focused to being more community focused in our high streets, which is what we want. And I think everything that you've just said there, John, will help towards that. So yeah, absolutely, let's pick this up offline.
Fantastic.
Great stuff. And we've got Katie Wells in Derby and Derbyshire, who's also saying that she's looking forward to speaking to you soon, John. So anyone out there who'd like to be in touch with Sook, if you can't make contact for any reason, just drop us a line at 3 Fox and we'd be happy to put you in touch. Jamie, you've got one chance on your raft in the middle of the ocean, waving for help, one chance to ask for help or support for your clients, what would you ask for first, and who would you ask?
Well, I mean, a brilliant answer from everybody else. I know I'm probably not allowed vaccine, but I am a bit bored. I'm a bit bored of this. I'm quite a social person, so I would quite like, as creative as all these solutions are, I'd quite like to get out there. But I suppose on that note, I think if we've got data and information, and we've got policy, and we've got money, the power comes from people and talent, doesn't it? So I just think, I suppose, if we could have more of that talent, if we could harness maybe some of these unemployed graduates, bring them in and around some of these challenges that Carol and Nabeel have got, create some leadership time from these characters, create the forums to be able to solve these problems. Just give yourself the ability to step back and then step right on in with the communities, with the businesses. I think the people, are the solvers of this problem so far, and they will continue to innovate. So yeah, I'll go with people and vaccine, and a pint, please.
Yeah, and also obviously Carol's solution of eating in to help out, which I liked a lot. Okay, viewers, we got a few questions. By the way, John's put his email address up on the chat, so if you want to get in touch with Sook, drop him a line there. Panel, have you got a best practice example of a digital high street or a vision for one? What are the most recent innovative technologies that can be applied? Is there a toolkit? And Knight asks. Nabeel, is there a toolkit?
I'm sure there is somewhere. I haven't got one to hand. But just on that point, there's something I saw recently. I can't remember exactly where it is. It may be Watford, but don't quote me on that. But there's the first WhatsApp high street in the country has been sort of announced. I think it may be Watford, but the idea is WhatsApp have partnered with the local council and are supporting businesses in transitioning to digital payments and using sort of WhatsApp networks to upskill one another and help one another out. And I think it sort of builds on the WeChat model in China. And I'm quite interested in that actually, because talking about the everyday economy as I was before, I think a lot of the smaller SMEs and micros that I speak to on some of our high streets, there is definitely a requirement to digitally upskill them and help them with that. And if organizations like WhatsApp or Nextdoor or Facebook or others can come into this space and really help out through their CSR functions, I think we should all be welcoming that, because I've seen what the art of the possible is with WeChat in China. And I think if we had something similar like that here, that would be that should be welcomed.
Great stuff, Nabeel. Thanks. My colleague Finn has put up a link to the story about Watford. It is Watford and WhatsApp on the chat there. Jamie, is there a toolkit available? What kind of support materials are available, given that we've had sort of 8 months of coronavirus now?
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? Consultancy opportunity.
Yeah.
I genuinely haven't seen one. A lot of the digital strategies get caught at quite a high level. So actually, I think it's a very good suggestion. Whoever did that. There's some great design guides. The Westminster Design Guide of how to open up spaces is really good. But I haven't seen a digital one, and I think genuinely that is something that people should come around and produce. So excellent suggestion.
Get to work, Jamie.
Yeah.
In a circle. Carol, let us know if there are any kind of toolkits or best practice examples that you've been following or that you think might be available to peers in other local authorities. And also, we've got another question from Michael Back about the role of communities in drawing up your response strategy in the first place, your high street task force and your comms program and so on. What kind of role did the community play in helping you develop that?
So as I mentioned at the beginning, we were keen to get representation on the High Street Task Force. So at the moment, it's representative of the bids and the business community primarily. We've also got councillors, local councillors and members who are then engaging with the local community. We've got members of their Ealing officers, but they're also heavily working within the local communities. So that's all feeding back. We want to grow and strengthen the task force and the stakeholder group. So we are looking at widening it. But in the first instance, it was primarily responding to the businesses. So the representation were initially bids and local traders groups and organisations, but we are now getting more and more representation, because we have to remember the high street is not just about the business, it's all about the local people that go there, and the local community is important. So yeah.
Thanks, Carol. Nabeel, if you'd like to pick up on how you got communities involved in your resilience strategy, that would be really useful. And also, we've got a sort of a specific question to you from Kate Bull, asking about how you were monitoring vacancy rates.
Sure. So, I mean, the first thing I'd say on this is I don't find it a tremendously sort of helpful distinction we make between our communities and our businesses. A lot of our businesses are our communities, actually. I mean, 87% of businesses in Lambeth are small and micro businesses, and actually a lot of them tend to be local as well. So when we're sort of consulting with our businesses, I do see it as part of consulting with the community in that sense. But in terms of community engagement specifically, I think that's come more on particularly the people side. I think the sort of skills and employment agenda sits with me as well within the council, and I'm very cognizant of the mass unemployment that we're about to face, and how we help our residents back into work as quickly as possible. And so I think a lot of the consultation we've done around the skills and our forthcoming skills and employment strategy, working with our colleges, working with our universities in terms of how we can set the skills and employment system up well. That's where community engagement has been sort of really at the forefront of our minds. And in terms of the specific question asked, so this is part of the commission data that we've commissioned, that we monitor vacancy rates, and we get fortnightly updates as to what the closures have been and where they've been as well, which allows us to keep a sense of the retail, non-essential, and other mixed diversity, and means we can move pretty fast for things like meanwhile uses that we may want to put in place whilst we wait for vacancies to be filled. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed, absolutely. And there was one question you mentioned earlier about using developer funds on the high street to support some of the funding grants that you were making. That was SIL funds that you were referring to, yeah?
Yes, it was. It was specifically neighbourhood SIL, but yes, as part of our SIL part. And actually, sorry, can I just say, this is why it's really important that we stay open for business and we keep our planning system open as well. So thinking about sort of more medium term, we've been very clear that we need to keep our planners on board and we need to keep the development system progressing, because actually, without the developer contributions that we get, we can't do some of the ambitious stuff that we have in mind. So it's very clear in our mind that we need to work with our investors, with our developers, to keep planning system open in Lambeth, keep Lambeth open business, so that we can do some of the more interesting, exciting, ambitious stuff with our local communities and keep them resilient.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Nabeel. And you have the last word today. So our hour is up. It always flashes by quicker than I expect. And we've got to let our viewers get back to work and put some of what they've learned today into action. Before you do that, viewers, we've got a little treat for you. Coming up in just a second, we've got two very short videos that explain in a little more depth what Sook can do for your high streets, and give you a case study of a retailer that's set up using Sook. And brought a vacant retail space vividly back to life. And we're going to press play on those in just a second, after I've taken this opportunity on your behalf to thank our tremendous panel. So thank you, John Hoyle of Sook. Thank you, Nabeel Khan of Lambeth Council. Thank you, Jamie Ounan of Inner Circle Consulting, and thank you, Carol Sam from Ealing Borough Council. And as ever, thank you, viewers, for being so attentive and engaged and providing us with a raft of questions at the end there. If you join our LinkedIn members group, the discussion will continue there, and we'll be back in a week with our session on build homes, build jobs, build innovation, and you don't want to miss that. So register and watch the video of this session and all of our other webinars at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. If you'd like to get involved in any of these sessions as a sponsor, as a speaker, please email me, toby@freefox.co.uk. Here come the videos. Meanwhile, from our panel, from me, and from everyone at FreeFox, good afternoon.
Have you ever dreamt of setting up a shop, hosting an exhibition, or running a wellness class? Then Sook is the solution. Sook is an adaptive retail space, available to book by the hour and personalised to you. Pick from Sook's growing network of locations and bring your vision to life in an instant with our ultra high-res digital walls. Customize the walls from anywhere in the world to transform your Sook with the touch of a button. The Sook Builder makes space design quick and simple. Just add images, videos, text and web pages to adapt the digital canvas. Immerse yourself in design with our 3D preview tool. View your Sook from every angle and make as many edits as needed ahead of your booking. Once your booking begins, your design is displayed for you and your audience in the physical space. Customize the music and lighting, then pick from our bespoke furniture to complement your interiors. Choose from tables, chairs, plinths, hanging rails and more to give your Sook the perfect finishing touches. From design to staffing, the entire process can be managed remotely. Whether you're based abroad or working from home, Sook has got you covered. Book by the hour and never pay for even a minute more than what you need. With our flexible availability and affordable rent, Sook lets you connect with your customers at the times that matter most and at a price that makes sense. Sook. It's your space, your way.
Hi, I'm Celia from Celia Pop Shop and I'm a second-hand and vintage clothing reseller. I discovered Sook through Instagram. I had a look at their website and thought it would be a really great way to bring my store into a real-life pop-up. Working with Sook definitely has been a simpler, more streamlined experience. Having all the rails set up already and knowing what the space is going to exactly look like before meant that I knew exactly what I was going to expect, and the setup took about an hour today when normally in past pop-ups it's taken me about 3 hours. Booking with Sook was super easy. I was quite daunted by the whole thing, obviously, because it's quite a big deal to be doing a pop-up here in Bond Street and having the whole place to myself as well, but they really reassured me and made me feel comfortable throughout the whole process. Using the Sook Builder for a pretty non-techie person, again, was really easy, and they were very willing to answer any questions I had about it, but I don't think I had any. It's pretty easy.
It's going really well. We've been open for a couple of hours. Footfall's been really good for a Sunday. It's been really nice meeting loads of people in person, which I wouldn't otherwise do because Depop's completely online. So yeah, it's been a really good day.
I'd 100% recommend Sook to other sellers. If you haven't done a pop-up before, it's a great way to start out. The process was so easy. Because you can book by the hour, it's much more of a low commitment than most stalls I've done before, where it's like a 3-day commitment to a space where you don't really know how it's going to go. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to do it again in the future.
So we're all done here today. It was so seamless, so easy. We had loads of customers in. Yeah, we had a great day. The guys were so helpful. And thank you to Sook for helping us, making it happen.